Hey folks, David Stewart here. Time for your daily trending for June 9th, 2020 for the next 4 minutes. It's going to be the next day by the time you guys actually watch this. Keep doing this late at night. I don't know why, but here we go. So, first and biggest one, Gone with the Wind. So HBO Max, some version of HBO, temporarily removes Gone with the Wind to add discussion of its historical context. This is the next thing that they come for is they come for the art. And I was reminded by Larry Bernard, a friend on Twitter, that the first ever Oscar awarded to an African-American was awarded for Gone with the Wind way back in 1939. It was awarded to Hattie McDaniel, I think is her name, whose Oscar I think was actually stolen at some point, if I remember the story right. Like she bequeathed it to like a university and then it disappeared from the university at some point. So yeah, she won an Oscar for that way back in 1939, and we're going to pull that performance related to the first African-American receiving an Oscar. So doesn't that just say all? Because why? Because somebody might get offended that it portrays antebellum South in a somewhat accurate light as to how it was. Yes, blacks were slaves, and then after the Civil War, they were a significant underclass. That's the reality. And while the protagonists are white, I don't think Gone with the Wind paints some kind of picture that slavery was great or something like that. I never got that from watching Gone with the Wind. But you could watch it yourself, and you could find a different stream of it and watch Gone with the Wind. And I still think it's the highest grossing film of all time when adjusted for inflation, which says a lot. It's definitely a Lindy there. So anyway, there's that. And of course, there's a bunch of other very, shall we say, un-PC, very influential movies that have happened over the years. One of which is called The Birth of a Nation, which is about the Ku Klux Klan. And that was, I think, the first feature-length film that was done. And I've actually seen it. It's been now like 20 years since I watched it. I watched it with a friend of mine who was a film buff. And it wasn't really an enjoyable experience, but it was interesting. It was a propaganda film that was pro-KKK, believe it or not. But you have to remember that back up through the early part of the 20th century, the Ku Klux Klan was essentially a professional organization for Democrat politicians and other Democrats. So a lot of people were in the KKK, even in the North, in states like Illinois and Indiana. They had strong chapters of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's only as, I guess, as societies have evolved that the Ku Klux Klan has become the rather memed outsider racist group that it is. Not that it wasn't a racist group in the past, it definitely was, but has become the kind of memed redneck group that we think about it being today. It used to be quite popular with Democrat politicians. Jenny69, I guess this is an influencer. People decided they don't like her. I can't find out anything about that. Vogue Challenge, this might be an interesting one. This is people making their own magazine covers, like with themselves on it. And some of them aren't bad, but a lot of them actually are bad. I'm surprised the number of people able to kind of capture the feel of a Vogue magazine cover with like themselves on it. A lot of people were able to kind of immediately pick up on the aesthetic direction that Vogue tends to do and just kind of copy that. I think that's what the Vogue Challenge was. Kind of interesting. I don't really read Vogue and I don't care anything about it though, so there you go. Dylan was framed. This is a big hashtag of people trying to figure out who Dylan was and why he was framed. So, no idea. What I remember from 2019, Gone with the Wind. That's the Gone with the Wind again. Song of the South. If you don't know what Song of the South was, it's another one of these movies that it's a movie that you don't get to watch anymore. And the only way that you can watch it is if you find some sort of rip of the European release of the VHS. As far as I know, Disney has never released Song of the South into the United States on some sort of home video. Now, I had an audio cassette tape of Song of the South. This is back in the 1980s before VHSs were really big and they were very expensive. So what we used to get is these audio tapes of the movie, especially musicals like Disney films, and it would have like all of the song numbers and it'd have the dialogue on it. So I had a cassette tape of it, and I remember it like my boombox like ate the tape one day, and I was just heartbroken about that because I listened to that tape nonstop. I loved the music on it. If you haven't ever heard the music, if you've ever ridden Splash Mountain, that is based on Song of the South. So they made a ride in Disneyland based on Song of the South years after it's released. Not only years after it's released, but years after they decided they would never release it because essentially it portrays an African American as a servant to white people, and that's the way it portrays it. Now, it doesn't. I don't think it's degrading to the actor or the character necessarily, but I've only been able to watch really crappy versions of it, like ripped from the VHS from Europe. So if you could find a copy of that, you can actually watch it. But an actual version of this movie, it's pretty hard to find. But it's about this character telling these stories, and you have Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit. And I think you can make some symbolic connections there as far as race goes, like don't throw me in the briar patch kind of stuff. But that's another one. Song of the South has been canceled for going on 40 years at this point. So I don't know if we'll ever get to see The Light of David, or they have a cut that's just the cartoons or something like that, or if the cartoons have too much race stuff in it for today's audience to not have like their gaskets explode. But in general, anyone who can sit through Gone with the Wind ought to be mature enough to know exactly what they're getting and where the story takes place. I might actually release a book this year that takes place in pre and post Civil War Arkansas and Texas. So of course, slaves exist during those time periods and those places. And you know what? If I might get canceled for just having a story set in a time and place where African Americans were enslaved. But that's reality. Are we going to not have any? I'm not going to have anything that takes place in ancient Rome. Romans had slaves. Are Roman slave things not allowed, or are they allowed because their slaves were Greeks and Slavs and Sicilians, and they did enslave Africans too? Is Roman allowed because it was really long ago, or like why are Roman stories allowed when they owned slaves, or Greeks owned slaves? Europeans enslaved each other through thrall systems and serf systems. Europeans were enslaved by Africans at various points in time. And are you going to have no stories set in some historical context where there were slaves? No, you have to get past that. Is that slavery was considered a human institution for a long time, and it's actually, it's good, but it's actually rather novel that we were able to, I guess, as a species, for the most part, overcome it. And I guess there's some open air slave markets that have returned to parts of Africa, which is very disturbing. But anyway, that's part of that. This is about a TV show. I'm not going to watch TV show. Leaving Las Vegas. That was a movie. I didn't really like it. I left Las Vegas at one point, though. So I can tell you my story of leaving Las Vegas, which was a pretty fun story, I guess. Me and my roommate had both moved on past the jobs we had there, and we decided to leave. And within, I think, about 30 days, we left. We gave our notice to the landlord when our lease was expiring, packed up, and we drove out of town with everything we owned in a trailer. And I remember at some point we were driving through the desert, like towards Barstow, and my roommate calls me. He's my brother-in-law now, by the way, but he calls me and he says, I just realized that like if the trailer flipped over and was destroyed, it wouldn't matter. Everything that I own that is worth anything to me is in my car. He was driving like a little Ford Focus, and what was in his car was his guitar, his dog, and his computer. So if the rest of it just fell off the road, then he probably would have been okay. And I'm like, yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, because all my guitars and all my stuff that I consider valuable was in my truck, and the trailer was just full of furniture. It's like, who cares about the furniture? It was garbage furniture anyway. Let's see if there's anything else. Southern Cal. No one calls it Southern Cal. We call it SoCal. But that's neither here nor there. I don't know why that's trending. I don't think there's anything else interesting going on here right now. More protests, whatever. Seattle City Hall. Thousands of protesters take over Seattle City Hall. This is always a little bit interesting when they just let them into the City Hall to do whatever they want. Oh, George P. Bush take a look at this guy. This is Jeb Bush's son, and he looks kind of like a satanic puppet to me. Actually, you know what he looks like is, if you ever saw Total Recall, you had that Johnny Cab. He looks like Johnny Cab from Total Recall, the weird little animatronic cab driver that would turn around and talk to you and make small talk. Oddly, I think like a bunch of things for Total Recall kind of become real, other than, I mean, maybe in some way we do have implanted memories called, like, we've played VR games or something like that. But yeah, he looks like Johnny Cab. And let me just say that, can we just not have any more Bushes in politics? You know, can we just be done having members of the Bush family in politics? Oh, and the last one, Cops is canceled. So the show Cops, the very long-standing show Cops, has been canceled. That's their response to this, is Cops is canceled. It's not showing up in that little hashtag there, but that's what's up. They canceled the show Cops because it's bad to show life on the beat. It's bad to show cops actually having their encounters with people. I don't know. I don't know how exactly I feel about that, because I haven't watched the show in 25 years, but I didn't even know it was still on the air. But it seems somehow fitting that they would be like, well, we're just not going to glorify cops at all, but we're not going to show the cop show. It's trending on YouTube. Bill and Ted's Face the Music. This is a great example of the corporate IP cycle that I've talked about. There's 5 stages. You have birth, explosion, then you have milking, phase 3. Then you have death and dormancy, and then you have reboot. So this is phase 5, reboot. So you had the birth, and that was Bill and Ted. You had the explosion, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, and then milking, Bill and Ted's Animated Adventures / people remembering Bill and Ted, and then it's dormancy and death. People remembered Bill and Ted being fun. They like Keanu Reeves. They liked the show a lot. And then phase 5, reboot. And if it's successful, you go right back to phase 3, milking, and you go back to milking the franchise some more. So it could be good, could be bad. It doesn't really matter. The point is, it's another example of leveraging Gen Y nostalgia, Gen X and Gen Y nostalgia for a couple of movies that were really funny back in whenever they came out, like 1990. So anyway, there's that. Bill and Ted. Someone has Tourette's, I guess. That sucks. Tourette's is an interesting disorder if you look into it. Destiny 2 reveal, I was like, hasn't Destiny 2 been out? But no, they're coming out with another expansion. Who cares? Destiny, the original Destiny, was one of the most disappointing games that I ever played. We have more Gorillaz, so that's cool. People were saying, hey, man, you got to go back and listen to the Gorillaz, because I know you remember watching the music videos and not remembering the music. And it's true. I don't remember the music for them at all. I just remember the aesthetics. This one, surprising Lana Rhoades with custom shoes. And this is a girl holding a pen and a blank shoe. This is called drawing on your shoes, not custom shoes. I had custom shoes when I was 6 because I drew on them. That's not that special, guys. So anyway, I guess that's about it for today, guys. Thanks so much. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Newest book is Tyrant's Gala. It comes out next week, and I'm getting the files prepped as we speak to get it going. Paperback will be available shortly, so make sure you're on the mailing list, dvspress.com/list, to stay appraised of when that is going to come out. It's coming out on the 16th, and you can pre-order it. There's a link on my website, or a link down below, I'm sure. So check that out, or just search it on Amazon and find it, and I'll see you guys next time.